Welcome to everyone who is listening to us for this new episode. Today we are diving into a transformation of the human condition that frankly has no precedent in our history.
Absolutely no precedent at all, yes.
That is the fact that today the vast majority of young people can realistically expect to become very, very old. And the sources we are exploring today are taken from excerpts of a much-discussed book, The Longevity Imperative, by the economist Andrew J. Scott. The mission of our exploration is not to give a lesson in medicine. The goal is to understand how to stop fearing this aging process and start redesigning our entire existence. We're talking about health, finances, work. In short, how to turn a longer life into a real opportunity without being paralyzed by anxiety about the future, which
is, unfortunately, the most common reaction.
Exactly. And to get right to the heart of the matter, the book proposes a thought experiment that I find brilliant. Let's imagine if anyone were offered just like that, an extra hour to use today, or an extra day each week.
Everyone would sign up immediately.
Of course. Or maybe 13 months a year instead of 12. The universal reaction would be pure enthusiasm. And yet the truth is that humanity has already received this gift, a huge one. In recent decades, life expectancy has increased by about 2 or 3 years for every decade that has passed. It's
an impressive statistic.
It's an enormous amount. Yet instead of celebrating this extra time, it seems we're terrified of it.
But look, it's a fascinating paradox, and it's exactly the starting point of the problem. We are facing this historic milestone with a completely wrong perspective.
What do you mean?
I mean that in public discourse in the media, we constantly hear talk about an aging society. This narrative is fundamentally and inherently negative. It focuses on the economic burden, the costs of care, on a sort of, let's say, loss of vitality for an entire country.
A somewhat catastrophic vision.
Absolutely true. The book instead suggests a complete paradigm shift. To build a longevity society. And be careful, the difference is not just semantic.
So it's not just a play on words.
Not at all. An aging society looks at the end of life, trying to limit the damage. A longevity society looks at the beginning. It focuses on how to prepare young people and adults for a life that will last much longer, aiming to maximize the quality of those additional years. Okay?
Let's analyze this point. Because to give a concrete dimension to this leap forward, thank you. The historical Swedish data cited by the author make the idea very clear. Let's talk about Sweden in 1851.
A different era.
Definitely. At that time, a 15-year-old had only an 11% chance of reaching their 80th birthday. A century later, in 1951, this probability had risen to 36%. Today, it is well over 70%.
A huge leap.
And this brings to mind a banal meteorological comparison for those who are listening. If the forecast gives an 11% chance of rain, you can leave the house without worry. No umbrella.
Certainly. If he takes a risk.
If the probability rises to 36%, maybe she slips a small folding umbrella into her bag, just to be safe. But with a 70% chance of rain, things change drastically. You go out with a raincoat, boots, and a sturdy umbrella because rain is almost certain. This comparison leads us to reflect. If reaching 80 years old or more is now a statistical certainty, how are we actually preparing for that moment?
That's exactly the point. You can't just improvise anymore. And to prepare properly, the first step the text suggests is to stop measuring time the way we've always done.
That is counting birthdays.
Exactly. We tend to think of age exclusively in chronological terms, simply counting the years lived since birth. But to navigate a longevity society, the concepts that really matter become thanatological age and biological age.
Thanatological age. It's a strong term?
It is, but it flips the hourglass in a very useful way. It indicates the number of years we statistically have left to live. Knowing that you have 30 or 40 years of active life ahead of you, starting at 50, well, it radically changes the decisions you make in the present.
From savings to relationships.
Absolutely. Biological age, on the other hand, measures the molecular and cellular damage that the body has actually accumulated. Two people with the same chronological age can have profoundly different biological ages.
And speaking of changing perspectives, there's another aspect related to the passage of time that really surprised me when reading these sources. It goes against everything our culture teaches us about aging. It concerns the famous happiness curve.
The U-curve.
Yes, it has a U shape. It starts with very high levels of happiness in youth, then gradually declines during the pressures of middle age. Work stress, the mortgage, family responsibilities.
The lowest point, usually.
Exactly. But then surprisingly, the curve rises again. Global surveys show unequivocally that older people are generally happier and more satisfied with their lives compared to those in the midst of their 40s.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a fact that overturns many prejudices.
Completely.
We tend to imagine aging as a one-way road toward decline, focusing only on the loss of physical vigor. We forget about the cognitive and emotional gains.
Which are enormous.
Enormous, yes. As the decades go by, there is a tremendous accumulation of wisdom and emotional intelligence. People learn to regulate their emotions, to give the right weight to events, and to filter out what is not essential. This newfound serenity is the reason why the U-curve rises again.
And recognizing this dynamic is vital so we don't see the future as a threat. This brings us to how science, but also popular culture, imagines this future. The author uses 4 literary scenarios to map out the different ways we can age.
The 4 archetypes, of course.
The first one is a bit scary, to be honest. It's the scenario of the Struldbrugs. They are creatures taken from Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels.
A rather distressing scenario. The Struldbrugs live forever, but in a state of continuous and relentless physical and mental decline. And the worrying thing is that, unfortunately, this largely represents the current situation in our society.
The red zone, so to speak.
Yes, modern medicine has become very good at prolonging life expectancy. It prevents people from dying of a heart attack at 60 or from an infection, but often fails to extend the years spent in good health. People live longer, but they live as patients.
At the opposite extreme is the second scenario, that of Dorian Gray. In this case, health remains perfect and intact for the entire duration of one's existence. You live splendidly for a normal span of time, and then, quite simply, life ends suddenly.
This is what in technical jargon is called the compression of morbidity.
To put it simply, it means reducing to an absolute minimum the period of time in which we are unwell before the end. You live life to the fullest, and then the curtain falls abruptly.
And that's already a huge step forward compared to the Struldbrug. But the third model is the one that science is pursuing with the most determination. The Peter Pan scenario.
Slowing down.
Exactly. An actual slowing down of the biological aging process. The result is not just a healthy life like in Dorian Gray, but a healthy life that lasts much, much longer. And
finally, there's the science fiction scenario, the one of Wolverine, the superhero. Here, it's not just about slowing down, but about reversing aging. A true regeneration of tissues. Now, these are fascinating concepts, but I wonder how an economist can put a price, a concrete value, on scenarios like these.
And it's one of the most complex challenges in economics, I assure you. To tackle it, economists use a statistical tool called the value of a statistical life, or VSL in English.
And this is exactly where it gets incredibly interesting.
Absolutely, and it's essential to clarify that this is not about assigning a moral or ethical price to a person's existence, as if we were putting a price tag on a book.
That would be absurd.
Of course, rather, it's a calculation based on how much a society is willing to spend to reduce a tiny fraction of mortality risk. In the United States, government agencies calculate this value, and currently it is around $11.4 million per individual.
Okay, so if we take these $11.4 million as a starting point and apply them to the Peter Pan scenario, calculating the impact of guaranteeing one more year of healthy life for the entire population, what kind of figures do we get?
We arrive at numbers that are almost incomprehensible to the human mind. Calculations estimate that achieving the Peter Pan scenario would be worth about $51 trillion.
51 trillion? And
this is only considering the US economy. The fascinating aspect here is the mechanism that generates this wealth.
let's explain it clearly.
Extending life in poor health like the Struldbrugs comes at a very high cost. It requires working much more or draining your savings to pay for years of medical care. It's almost like a tax. Slowing down aging in good health, on the other hand, generates what economists call a double dividend.
Double dividend? What do you mean?
It means that not only do you gain more time, but you gain time of the highest quality. This allows people to keep producing, consuming, and enjoying life without placing a catastrophic burden on healthcare systems. The individual becomes wealthier, and at the same time, public spending is reduced. It's
the perspective that overturns the traditional view of medicine. The text points out that historically we have gone through the longevity revolution 1.0, the one in which humanity defeated infectious diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis.
Exactly, allowing people to survive childhood.
Now we are in the midst of version 2.0. We need to defeat age-related diseases such as cancer or dementia. But there is a huge obstacle. Treating these diseases one at a time is an approach that is failing due to the problem of competing risks.
Competing risk is a clinical concept that is as logical as it is frustrating. Let's try to imagine that tomorrow we find the ultimate cure for all types of cancer.
It would be a scientific miracle.
It would be, but overall life expectancy would only increase by a couple of years. Why? Because if an elderly patient is cured of cancer, their cells still continue to age at the same rate.
So something else takes over?
Inevitably. Shortly after, another age-related disease will take over, like a cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's. It's like trying to plug the leaks in a boat that's rotting away. You can patch one hole, but the wood around it will still give way.
And that's why medicine is changing course, focusing on geroscience. While reading the sources, I found examples in nature that seem straight out of a movie. They mention the naked mole rat, which is this small subterranean mammal whose mortality rate hardly increases with age at all.
An incredible creature from a biological point of view.
Or the hydra, a tiny freshwater polyp that continuously regenerates its own tissues, practically immune to aging.
These organisms are living proof that aging is malleable. It is not an immutable law of physics. By studying these exceptions, geroscience has managed to map out the so-called hallmarks of aging.
The hallmarks of aging.
Exactly those. These are the underlying mechanisms that cause the deterioration of the human body, and one of the most studied at the moment is cellular senescence.
What exactly do we mean by cellular senescence? Are we talking about cells that die?
On the contrary, we're talking about cells that refuse to die.
Ah, I see.
Normally, a damaged cell self-destructs so as not to cause problems for the organism. But as we age, some cells stop dividing and, instead of eliminating themselves, remain active in an altered state. Researchers often call them zombie cells.
Does that get the idea across?
Unfortunately, yes. And the problem is that these zombie cells start secreting toxic chemicals that inflame the surrounding tissues, accelerate overall aging, and create a fertile ground for tumors and degenerative diseases.
So targeting them at the root would prevent a myriad of different diseases all at once?
Exactly. It is
An incredible frontier. But while we wait for science to find a way to eliminate zombie cells with a pill, the book reminds us that we already have enormous power. Pure genetics determines only between 15 and 30% of our longevity.
the rest is in our hands.
The remaining 70 to 80% is dictated by lifestyle. Nutrition, physical exercise, sleep quality, prevention is a daily practice.
And this awareness is pushing medical research toward accessible clinical tests. An example mentioned in the text is the TAME study, which stands for Targeting Aging with Metformin.
Metformin, that diabetes medication?
Exactly that one. It's extremely widespread and very inexpensive, used for decades to treat type 2 diabetes. Researchers noticed something strange. Diabetic patients taking metformin seem to develop fewer age-related diseases, even compared to healthy non-diabetics.
Incredible.
The TAME study aims precisely to verify whether this drug can be used preventively on completely healthy people, acting as a sort of general shield. And on the diagnostics front, there are new developments like the epigenetic clock by researcher Steve Horvath.
I've read about it. It's based on measuring DNA methylation. But what about those of us, like me, who don't have a degree in molecular biology? How does this methylation work?
Let's imagine our DNA as a perfect instruction manual, written to make every cell function properly. When we're born, the pages are spotless and easy to read.
So far, so good.
As time goes by, exposure to the environment, stress, diet, or pollution start to stick little chemical post-its onto these pages. This is methylation.
And they hide the instructions.
Exactly. The more post-its accumulate, the harder it becomes for the cell to read the original instructions. And the cell starts to malfunction. Horvath's clock does exactly this. Does it count how many post-its have accumulated? And it tells us with extreme precision what our true biological age is.
Regardless of what your ID says, it's a powerful tool because it lets us see if our habits are working. But all this scientific optimism clashes with harsh economic reality. And here comes the million-dollar question. So what does all this mean for our wallets?
That's quite a problem.
In the article, there's the story of Richard Deaver, a 74-year-old man who is forced to drive for miles to mow the lawn and clean the bathrooms at a campground in Maine. He doesn't do it to stay active, he does it because he desperately needs the money.
It's the elephant in the room when it comes to longevity.
How do we finance it? A life that stretches to 100 years? The options seem brutal. Either you save drastically today, giving up on living, or you work for decades longer. It's
It's a real short circuit between advancing biology and struggling economics. Current pension systems in almost every country were designed for a world where people retired at 65 and statistically lived for another 10 or 15 years.
not for 30 or 40.
Who is normie? The book mentions the case of France. The raising of the retirement age from 61 to 64 years, pushed by the Macron administration, sparked unprecedented social protests.
Paralyzing the country for months.
Analyzing the situation in a purely objective way, beyond political positions, one fact emerges: moving the retirement age by government decree. It's a palliative.
Doesn't it fail to solve the problem at its root?
No, because if you raise the retirement age by law, without first ensuring that people over 50 are healthy, and above all, that companies are willing to hire them, you don't save the pension system. You only create unemployment and poverty among the most vulnerable. Speaking
Of companies that hire, there's a very persistent prejudice that's hard to eliminate. It's often said that if older people keep working, they're taking jobs away from the young. It's a concern I understand, but the economic analysis in the book says the opposite.
It says the opposite because that fear is based on a well-known economic fallacy, the so-called lump of labor fallacy.
In other words, the idea that jobs are limited.
Exactly, as if the economy were a fixed-size pie. If an older worker takes a slice, there's less left for a young person. But the real economy doesn't work like that. It's dynamic,
It grows.
of course. If more people, including those of advanced age, keep working and continue to earn a salary and spend, they buy goods, travel, pay for services,
Creating new demand.
which in turn pushes companies to create new jobs to meet that demand. The data is clear. In countries with high employment among older workers, there is also lower youth unemployment.
The two things feed into each other. And this means that extending one's career can be an economic driver. But the idea of working non-stop for 50 years is exhausting. And here I quote an enlightening concept from the text. George Bernard Shaw used to say that youth is wasted on the young.
A very famous quote.
In a longevity society, we might discover that free time is wasted on the elderly. What sense does it make to work like mules for 4 decades, saving up all the rest for the end, when your energy to travel starts to decline?
It's an excellent reflection.
If people live in good health until 100 years old, retirement can no longer be a leap into the void. It will have to become a flexible path. We could take breaks for leisure at 40 or 50 years old, travel and retrain ourselves, and postpone final retirement. It is
A beautiful vision, but to make it a reality, companies have to do their part. They need to create roles. Age-friendly, suitable for all ages.
which doesn't mean less productive.
No. But with different characteristics, now more flexible, greater autonomy, and the possibility to do mentoring. Without a redesign of the world of work, extending careers will become nothing but torture.
Summing up our journey, clear lessons emerge. Aging is not fixed. The healthcare system must shift from treatment to prevention, and our careers will need flexibility. The lesson for anyone listening to us is that preparing to live to 100 years old requires different decisions. Today,
Decisions that range from sleep to lifelong learning. And this raises an important question with which the author concludes many of his reflections. He tells the story of a bet between two scientists, Steve Austad and Jay Olshansky.
the famous bet on the human limit.
Yes, Austad bet that by the year 2150, someone will manage to live to 150 years old, while maintaining their faculties. They put some money into a trust fund that, with interest, will be worth about $1 billion for the heirs of the winner.
$1 billion on the future of biology? It's crazy, and this bet leaves us with a provocative thought, a final thought. Let's try to imagine if science really allowed us to live up to 150 years in perfect health.
Everything would change.
How would our human relationships change? The very concept of lifelong commitment, promising to stay together until Mars do us part. It takes on a very different weight if it means sharing more than an entire century, going through countless phases of life together. It's a profound question to reflect on until our next in-depth exploration. Goodbye, and thank you for being with us.